In the fall of 2005, 29-year-old lawyer Anna Sumner leaned her elbows against her large wooden desk and stared at her computer screen. It was hard not to let her mind wander. She could see downtown Atlanta, Georgia, right from her office window. Anna yawned and stretched and then forced her eyelids to stay open. It was already 5 p.m., but she still had an important brief to finish before she could go home. Her attention wandered again, this time to the framed diplomas that hung on her wall. She had an undergraduate degree from Princeton, and she had received her law degree from Duke. She'd studied very hard in school and now had worked her way up the ranks at a very prestigious law firm. She was proud of everything she'd accomplished. Anna leaned back in her chair and kicked off her high heels. She was exhausted. Then again, she was always exhausted. In high school, she used to skip hanging out with friends just to go to bed early, which left her feeling totally isolated. During college, she routinely skipped breakfast to sleep in, and then showed up to class so hungry she couldn't even focus. Once, she'd flown cross-country for a friend's wedding, and then accidentally slept through the entire thing. Finding the energy to get through law school had been a constant struggle, and it was even harder as a young lawyer at a big firm where so much was expected of new people. Sometimes she feared that her constant fatigue was damaging the career she had sacrificed so much for. It was beyond frustrating. Anna had slept for at least 12 hours the night before, yet here she was, not feeling rested. It was like she was moving through a fog at all times. She always needed more sleep, but she knew she needed to keep working. Anna stood up and shook her arms, trying to get her blood moving. She opened her eyes as wide as she could. She shook her head back and forth and sat back down, determined to finish her work. But as soon as she started to type, her eyelids grew heavy again, and Anna nodded off, her cheek resting on the keyboard. The next thing Anna knew, she was slowly waking up. Her back ached from being hunched over in her chair. Her computer screen had gone to sleep too. She shook the mouse and the screen lit up, and she looked at the time. It was 6 a.m. Anna had just slept for 13 hours. She was completely disoriented, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and her brief was not finished. Anna immediately felt a knot form in her throat. She had been successfully hiding her sleepiness problem ever since she was a teenager when it began. She'd always been able to arrange her schedule to accommodate her constant need to sleep. But now that she had a job with a lot of responsibilities, she just didn't have that same flexibility. Anna had always prided herself on having a good work ethic and self-control, but now she realized that this was something she really just couldn't control. Sometimes when Anna felt really tired, she would think to herself, if I don't sleep right now, I feel like I could actually die. She knew that was not normal. This problem had gone on long enough, and it wasn't going to get better unless she sought out some help. A few days later, Anna drove to the Emory Clinic Sleep Center in Atlanta. It was inside an old, faded building undergoing significant renovations. In fact, there was still construction going on outside. Anna plugged her ears as she walked past jackhammers slamming into concrete. She checked in, and a few moments later, a gray-haired, round-faced doctor walked her back to a large exam room with chairs and a bed. He adjusted his glasses and then introduced himself as Dr. David Rye, the lead neurologist at the clinic. He motioned for Anna to take a seat and asked her about her symptoms. And she told him that she basically craved sleep the same way a drug addict craves a fix. No matter how much she slept, she never felt rested, and the constant exhaustion was totally debilitating. Dr. Rye nodded understandingly and suggested they begin with a very basic test. He asked Anna to simply take a nap, right there in the exam room. And so Anna laid down on the bed. She could still hear the loud construction noises going on outside, but it didn't bother her. Within moments, she was asleep. But just a few minutes later, Dr. Rye shook her awake, and then he diagnosed her with a disorder called hypersomnia. This is a catch-all term for extreme, unexplained sleepiness. It's thought that up to 5% of the entire population experiences it, though rarely at the level Anna was. So while it was a diagnosis, it really wasn't that specific. But for Anna, who'd never seen a doctor for her sleep problems before, having any diagnosis was progress. And she was even more optimistic when Dr. Rye suggested a treatment plan. He explained that in most cases, extreme tiredness is caused by a lack of energy-promoting chemicals in the brain, with names like dopamine and norepinephrine. It's like having a car with no gas in the tank. So he prescribed stimulants for Anna. These medications increase the level of these energy-promoting chemicals the same way that caffeine does. For patients like Anna, it can feel like they have a full tank of gas again. And Anna was so excited about her stimulants that after she left the doctor's office, she went straight to the pharmacy. When she got there, a pharmacist handed her a paper bag with a couple of prescription bottles inside, and Anna didn't waste any time getting her first dose. Sitting in her car in the parking lot, she opened one of the bottles, shook a pill into her hand, and swallowed it. She couldn't wait to feel better. A few months later, Anna grabbed a stack of papers off the desk in her office. Her hands shook slightly as she slipped the papers into her shoulder bag. She stood up from her desk chair, and suddenly a wave of nausea washed over her. She'd taken her prescription stimulants that morning and had been taking them every day since Dr. Rai prescribed them. In some ways, the stimulants were working. She could get through a full day of work without needing a nap, but the side effects from the medication were terrible. She felt jittery and sick to her stomach, like she'd had way too many cups of coffee. She was losing weight because she never had any appetite. And even though she had felt kind of okay for a while on this medication, she was now starting to crave sleep again. As she walked outside and unlocked her car, all Anna could think about was getting home and going to bed. She got into her car, pulled out her phone, and called Dr. Rai. She told him about the side effects she was feeling and now how her craving for sleep was starting to come back. Dr. Rai assured her that this was actually normal. He told Anna her body was building up a tolerance to the drugs and he'd simply prescribe her a higher dose. Anna was nervous about this. The stimulants were already giving her such bad side effects, and she thought taking more would really only make her feel worse. But at the same time, the medication was the only thing allowing her to make it through the day. So Anna agreed to the higher dose. She hung up, drove to the pharmacy, and picked up more medication. One year later, on a Friday in April of 2007, Anna was wrapping up her work for the week when the phone on her desk rang. It was her boss. He wanted her to come up to his office before she went home. Anna's hand trembled as she set down the receiver. She wasn't sure if the trembling was from a side effect of the stimulants or from nerves from what her boss just asked her to do. She knew what this conversation was going to be about, and she'd been dreading it for months. Anna had begun missing entire days of work without warning and without explanation. Even though she was constantly taking all of her stimulants, it wasn't uncommon for Anna to still literally sleep days away. Sometimes she'd go to bed and sleep for 20, 25, or even 30 hours straight. It didn't matter how many alarms she set either. Anna slept through all of them, only waking up when her body finally let her. Anna got up from her chair and her legs felt heavy. Even now, with adrenaline coursing through her body, all Anna wanted to do was sleep. It took all her strength to trudge down the hall to her boss's corner office. She knocked on the door, and then, in a somber tone, her boss asked her to come inside. Anna sat down across from his desk and tried to stay composed. She felt angry at her body for betraying her. She'd put in so many years of hard work, and she was sure that it was all about to slip away. But Anna's boss didn't fire her. He reassured Anna that he valued her contributions, but he was really concerned about her health. Though Anna rarely talked about it, her boss was quite aware of her sleep issue, and so he recommended that she take a 6-month leave of absence so she could get to the bottom of it. Anna didn't want to do this. She wanted to keep working, but she knew that taking this leave of absence was probably the right thing to do. If she couldn't be consistently relied on, she wouldn't be helping the firm, her clients, or herself. So she thanked her boss for understanding and promised to do everything she could to get back to work soon. The next afternoon, Anna was lying on her couch at home, trying to make sense of her struggles. She sipped on a cup of coffee and tried to watch TV, but as usual, she couldn't stop herself from nodding off. This time though, waking up was worse than ever. Her head was pounding and the light coming in through the blinds seemed overwhelmingly bright. She had sharp hunger pangs in her stomach and her joints felt stiff and her muscles were weak and shaky. It took all her effort just to roll onto her side. She saw the TV had shut off and the cup of coffee she'd just been drinking was now totally cold and the cream inside of the coffee was clearly rotten and curdled at the top of the cup. Anna was confused and grabbed her phone on the coffee table, and she checked the time and date. And what she saw literally did not seem possible. According to the time, Anna had just slept for 53 hours straight. It had been over 2 days since she'd laid down on the couch, but it felt like, a second had passed. Staring at the date and time on her phone, she felt sick. Her symptoms were really starting to frighten her. How long would she sleep the next time? A week? More? How could she live anything like a normal life if this was what happened to her? She called Dr. Rye's office immediately, and he thankfully had an immediate appointment available. As Anna dragged herself off the couch and walked out to her car, she felt weak and clumsy. Walking was like trying to pull her body through sludge these days. She gingerly lowered herself into the driver's seat and then drove straight to the Emory Clinic Sleep Center. Before long, Anna was in that familiar exam room, sitting across from Dr. Rye. He seemed surprised to see her, but when she told him about falling asleep for 53 hours straight, his eyes went wide. Dr. Rye knew that spending so much time asleep could actually be dangerous. It meant Anna wasn't eating, drinking water, or exercising for days at a time. In the long term, this could lead to malnutrition, dehydration, and muscle atrophy. If she wasn't able to take care of herself, her body would eventually quit working. However, Dr. Rye said he did have an idea for what they could do next. It was a last-ditch effort and something he would not recommend unless it was absolutely an emergency, and clearly this was that. There was a test that could help them figure out what was causing her to sleep so much, but for it to be accurate, she needed to stop taking all the stimulants he'd been prescribing. Anna leaned back in her seat after hearing this. She knew the stimulants weren't perfect. No matter the dosage, she always needed more, and she was still sleeping way too much. But at the same time, the idea of not taking them scared her. If she could sleep for 53 hours with stimulants in her system, what would happen to her without stimulants? But in Dr. Rye's opinion, getting rid of the stimulants might be the only way to figure out what was happening inside of her brain. It would take about a month for the drugs to clear her system, so the doctor scheduled an appointment for a month from then, in May. Until then, the doctor explained to Anna that she really needed to be careful. Once she stopped taking these stimulants, she shouldn't drive, just in case she fell asleep behind the wheel, and she should have someone looking after her, making sure she ate, drank, and moved around every day. Anna realized that what the doctor was saying was, without these stimulants, she could not live alone anymore. And so, after she made it home from the clinic, she called her parents, who lived in Mississippi, and she told them she needed their help. Her parents immediately agreed, and her mother said she'd come to stay with Anna in Atlanta for as long as she needed. Anna was relieved to hear this, but at the same time, she was so tired she could barely function. She felt like she was literally sleeping her life away. A month later, in May of 2007, Anna's mom helped her get into the passenger seat of her car. With no stimulants in her system, Anna felt even more lethargic and totally confused. All she knew on this day was that they were going to the sleep clinic to see Dr. Rye. The whole ride, Anna sat with her head leaned against the window, watching trees and buildings blur together as she slipped in and out of consciousness. When they got to the Emory Clinic Sleep Center, Anna felt so stiff and heavy that her mom had to help her get out of the car. Anna could barely keep her eyes open as she leaned on her mom's arm, and then she shuffled her way into the clinic, feeling like she had cinder blocks stuck to her feet. Dr. Rye met Anna in the waiting area and walked her back to an exam room. They sat down, Dr. Rye in a chair and Anna on the bed. And as soon as Anna was sitting down, she started to feel herself beginning to fall asleep. As she struggled to stay awake, Dr. Rye explained the procedure they'd be doing that day. He said sleep was largely controlled by a person's brain. The brain uses nerves and chemicals to send messages through the rest of the body, and if the balance of these chemicals is thrown off, it could make someone sleep far too little or far too much. Dr. Rye thought this could be what was happening to Anna, but he needed to analyze the fluid inside her spinal cord to be sure. This meant he would need to insert a needle into the base of her spine and withdraw some of the fluid, a procedure known as a spinal tap. Dr. Rye instructed Anna to lay down on the bed in the fetal position with her back facing him. Then he injected a local anesthetic near her spine, and Anna's back went numb. Then Anna began to feel pressure and a burning sensation as Dr. Rye inserted the needle into her spine and removed a sample of her cerebrospinal fluid. When the procedure was over, Dr. Rye told Anna it would take a few days for the results to come back. And so Anna stood, her back numb and her whole body exhausted, and she shuffled out to the waiting room where her parents were sitting. Then the parents helped Anna out to the car, they got inside, and they drove back to Anna's house in Atlanta. Anna barely made it inside before she collapsed into bed and fell asleep. A few days later, Dr. Rye was getting ready to leave work to head home when one of his assistants rushed inside and told him that the results of Anna's test had come in. Dr. Rye adjusted his glasses and then peered down at the data on his computer screen. He reviewed the chemical breakdown of Anna's cerebrospinal fluid, and what he saw shocked him so much that he called over other doctors to take a look. Every sleep specialist at the clinic was totally surprised. The results were so bizarre that one doctor even started laughing at the absurdity of the numbers they were seeing. They had literally never seen anything like this. But while the other doctors stood in disbelief, Dr. Rye felt a mixture of hope and unease. He had seen results like this before, in an Italian sleep study from the 1990s. In that study, a group of people who had symptoms similar to Anna's were given an experimental drug that cured their sleepiness. It was a drug that Dr. Rye had on hand, which meant he might be able to use it to cure Anna too. But there were problems that made Dr. Rye hesitant. That Italian study had been discredited after the research was found to have some serious issues. Plus, the drug used in that study to cure their sleepiness was never approved by the Food and Drug Administration to treat sleep disorders, and it could cause bad side effects like seizures. So giving it to Anna would definitely be a risk. But faced with Anna's spinal tap results, Dr. Rye thought the risk was worth it. And so he called Anna and told her that he might be able to treat her sleepiness, but they need to do one more test. The next month, in June of 2007, Anna came back to the Emory Clinic. She'd been off the stimulants now for 2 months, and it felt like her body was close to shutting down on her, like she'd never be able to do anything except sleep again. Every footstep she took was a total battle. She dragged herself into the exam room and crawled into the bed. She felt a nurse lift her arm, swab near her wrist, and then jab her with an IV needle. Anna was vaguely aware of other movement in the room. Multiple nurses were standing by, just in case Anna had a bad reaction to the drug, like a seizure or worse. Anna watched as Dr. Rye rolled a screen into the room. Everything looked slightly blurry to her. She heard Dr. Rye say they were doing a test to measure her brain's reaction time, and then he put a remote in her hand and told her to press the button as soon as she saw numbers appear on this screen. Anna tried to follow his instructions, but at the same time, she felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness, and so when a number popped up, she would press the button like she was told to, but she could tell by the look on Dr. Rye's face that she was not doing a good job. After the test was over, Dr. Rye told Anna that her reaction times were similar to someone who had just been up all night, or who had been drinking very heavily. And so now that they had these control results, they could try the medication that Dr. Rye hoped would help her. Anna watched as Dr. Rye put something into her IV bag. The liquid dripped through the tube into her arm and into her bloodstream. But Anna didn't feel any better. Her head felt like a lead weight. Her eyes were so dry that they burned, and the whole room seemed foggy. It took everything in her not to slump over and let her eyes close. For a moment, she had a horrible feeling that this new treatment was not going to work. She would never be able to hold a job or even live by herself again. Then she heard Dr. Rye's voice at her side saying he was going to try a higher dose of this drug. Anna struggled to take a deep breath. She waited for something to happen. Then her eyelids snapped open. The room came into focus, and Anna felt like she could hear and see again, and she didn't feel a desperate urge to sleep. Dr. Rye ran the reaction time test again, and Anna didn't have to work to focus on the screen. The reflex test that had seemed impossible before felt very simple now. When they were finished, Anna looked up at Dr. Rye, close to tears, and she told him she felt alive. For the first time in her adult life, Anna felt truly awake. Dr. Rye watched Anna for a moment. In all the time he'd known her, he'd never seen her look this alert. She sat up straight, her eyes were clear and focused, and she was smiling at him. He couldn't help but smile back. It was incredible to see how much of a difference this drug was making. Dr. Rai sat down next to Anna and told her that he had never seen a patient like her before. Her brain was basically full of naturally occurring anesthesia. He explained that there's a chemical messenger in everyone's brains known as GABA, G-A-B-A, that helps regulate sleep. Many sleep aids and drugs used for surgical anesthesia make the brain respond more strongly to GABA. The stronger the response, the sleepier a person gets, Dr. Rai said. And the reason Anna's doctors were so shocked by her test results was because her naturally occurring GABA activity levels were as high as a person who was about to go into surgery. Every day of her life, 24 hours a day, Anna was walking around with the same level of sedation as a person about to have all their wisdom teeth removed. Dr. Rai watched Anna's jaw drop as she realized that she hadn't just been tired for most of her life. Her own brain had been literally knocking her out. This drug that Dr. Rai had given her was called flumazenil. Usually, flumazenil is used in hospitals to help people who are overdosing on sedatives or having trouble waking up from anesthesia. It's an emergency antidote for people whose GABA activity is too high. So for Anna, whose GABA activity was always too high, flumazenil made her brain function like a healthy person's brain. But the FDA never approved flumazenil for excessive sleepiness. The drug only came as an intravenous medication for use in hospitals, and the effects wore off really quickly. Anna would need to have intravenous injections every few hours to stay awake, and that just wasn't possible from a practical standpoint. So Dr. Rai worked with Anna and the drug maker over the next 8 months to get an exemption from the FDA that would allow her to take a daily flumazenil pill to prevent her sleepiness. The medication completely changed Anna's life. She's since gone back to work, been promoted to partner at the big prestigious law firm in Atlanta, and is enjoying what she calls, quote, the luxury of life. May 29th, 1993, the sun rose over the high desert of Little Water, New Mexico. The air was crisp and the sky was pink as 21-year-old Florina Woody went for a run with her 19-year-old boyfriend, Merrill Bay. Florina and Merrill were both Navajo and lived in a small rural town on the vast Navajo reservation that sprawls across 3 southwestern states. Florina loved the majestic landscape surrounding the town and spent as much time as she could outdoors. And she was especially happy to be outside again after a long, wet winter. She and Merrill jogged along the country highway past small houses and trailer homes set back from the road. In the distance, Florina admired the tall red rock cliffs glowing in the sun. The couple turned off the road and headed up a path toward a flat-topped hill called a mesa. Usually, the top was dry and dusty, but the wet winter had turned it lush and green and scattered with wildflowers. Once they reached the top, they stopped to look down at the town below. Florina could just make out the trailer home that she and Merrill shared with her parents. It sometimes felt crowded living there together, but she was grateful for their close-knit family, especially since she and Merrill were raising their first child now, a 6-month-old son. Florina and Merrill jogged back down the mesa and kept a steady pace the whole way home. Merrill had recently started competing in local races and was always trying to strengthen his endurance. As for Florina, she had reasons to challenge herself too. She'd originally taken up running to offset her asthma, which had gotten better lately. Once they got home, Florina went inside their trailer, she showered, and then she went to relax on the couch. But when she sat down, she noticed her neck and back muscles were aching more than usual. She asked Merrill for a massage, but her muscles still felt sore afterwards. Florina wondered if she might have pulled something during their run, so she tried to take it easy for the rest of the day. Over the weekend and into the following week, Florina's aches and pains did not get better. She developed a cough, too, that felt different than her usual asthma. By Friday, just over a week after she first felt sick, Florina realized her symptoms were not going away with rest, so Merrill made her a doctor's appointment for the next day. On Saturday, May 8th, while Merrill watched the baby, Florina's parents drove her to Crown Point Healthcare Facility, which was located about an hour and a half south and east of their town. It was a commute Florina knew well, since she'd given birth there. Crown Point was a small rural hospital operated by the Indian Health Service with about 10 doctors. 2 of the doctors were a married couple named Christine Golnick and Thomas Hennessy, who had helped deliver Florina's baby. Florina's parents parked close to the entrance and walked with her into the lobby. Right away, Florina saw Dr. Golnick's familiar face smiling at her. Florina smiled back and waved. After signing in, she followed Dr. Golnick to an exam room in the back. Dr. Golnick placed a stethoscope on Florina's chest and listened. Then she held her fingers to Florina's wrist and measured her pulse. Florina watched Dr. Golnick's face for a reaction, but her expression remained neutral. The doctor understood why Florina was worried, since her symptoms had persisted for so long, but thankfully her vitals had come back normal, and so the doctor suspected it was just a bad case of the flu. But considering Florina's history with asthma and her lingering symptoms, Dr. Golnick didn't want to take any chances. She suggested that Florina spend the night at the hospital. In the morning, Dr. Golnick's husband, Dr. Hennessy, could come give a second opinion. Florina resisted at first, since the next day was Mother's Day. She said she wanted to get home and spend it with Meryl and their baby, but Dr. Golnick promised Florina that she could leave once Dr. Hennessy checked up on her the next day. So Florina agreed to stay. She knew that it was better to play it safe, especially because she lived so far from the hospital. She told her parents they could head home for the night, and then she called Meryl. He told her he loved her and promised he'd come get her first thing in the morning once she was discharged. The next morning, Florina woke to a knock at the door. It was Dr. Hennessy, and Florina was glad to see him because now she was feeling worse and she was struggling to catch her breath. Dr. Hennessy listened to her lungs with a stethoscope and frowned. He told Florina that he wanted to take a chest x-ray to get a better look at her lungs. Unfortunately, that meant Florina would have to stay at the hospital a bit longer. Florina was disappointed, but she was also relieved that Dr. Hennessy seemed to be treating her symptoms so seriously. Whatever was going on with her felt much worse than the usual breathing issues she experienced from her asthma, and she was starting to get scared. A few minutes later, a technician wheeled in a mobile x-ray unit and scanned Florina's upper body. While she waited for the results, a nurse brought Florina a phone so she could call Meryl. And when Meryl answered, he told Florina that their baby was napping and they'd just celebrate Mother's Day when she got home that night. Hearing Meryl's voice calmed her down, but Florina still felt helpless and lonely. This was not how she envisioned her first Mother's Day going. A little over an hour later, the X-ray technician brought Florina's test results to Dr. Hennessy. The image showed Florina's lungs all whited out, which meant they were full of fluid. Dr. Hennessy was shocked by what he saw, and he ran to Florina's room. He found her lying there with her eyes half closed and her mouth ringed with a dry white liquid. She was desperately struggling to breathe. Dr. Hennessy couldn't believe it. For a patient this young and athletic to go from healthy to near respiratory failure in 24 hours was unheard of. The doctor immediately called for a helicopter to fly Florina to the University of New Mexico Hospital in Albuquerque, which had a much better equipped intensive care unit. But until the helicopter arrived, Dr. Hennessy had to try everything possible to stabilize her condition. He fitted Florina with an oxygen mask to pump air into her lungs, but within a few moments, she coughed up bloody pink froth. Dr. Hennessy's face turned ashen as he realized what was happening. Florina's lungs were so congested, the extra oxygen was not doing anything. And there was another urgent problem. Florina's blood pressure was dropping rapidly. Dr. Hennessy shouted for a nurse to give Florina IV fluids, and as the medicine entered Florina's body, Dr. Hennessy's eyes shot over to the monitors tracking her vitals. They were still extremely weak. Florina's body just wasn't getting enough oxygen, and her organs were starting to shut down. Getting Florina to breathe was now a matter of life and death. The doctor quickly snapped on a pair of fresh gloves, he grabbed a scalpel from an operating tray, and then took a deep breath to steady himself. And then, when Dr. Hennessy was ready, he carefully cut an incision into Florina's throat and inserted a breathing tube directly into Florina's airway. He heard Florina's heart rate monitor beep rapidly for a few moments, and then it went flat. Florina had gone into cardiac arrest. Dr. Hennessy knew he only had a few seconds left to save her life. He started CPR while the nurse grabbed the defibrillator. Once it was charged, the doctor grabbed the paddles and pressed them to Florina's chest, and then the machine released a bolt of electricity into her body. Florina's heart rate monitor stayed flat, so Dr. Hennessy recharged the defibrillator and sent another shock through Florina's body. Just then, a nurse ran in and told the doctor that the helicopter had just arrived. But by this point, Dr. Hennessy just shook his head. It was too late. Florina was dead. Later that morning, Florina's fiancé, Merrill, was at home sitting by the baby's crib when his phone rang. He recognized the voice on the other end as one of the doctors from Crown Point Hospital, but the words he was hearing, he just couldn't compute. Something had gone terribly wrong, Florina had died, and no one really knew why. Doctors were running tests, but they had never seen anything like it before. Merrill crumpled to the floor. When he'd kissed Florina goodbye less than 24 hours ago, she'd been a bit under the weather, but it didn't seem serious. He didn't understand how this could have happened. Merrill took a moment to gather himself, then he walked into the kitchen where Florina's parents were having their morning coffee. He tried to tell them what had happened, but the words got stuck in his throat. Then he just closed his eyes, let out a deep breath, and blurted out, "Florina is dead." Florina's parents stared at him blankly. Her mother asked him what he was talking about. Tears started streaming out of Merrill's eyes as he explained what the doctors had just told him. Florina really was dead. It had happened extremely fast, and the doctors couldn't do anything to save her. This time it sunk in, and Florina's parents started sobbing. How could a 21-year-old mother in perfect health just suddenly die? That night, Merrill barely slept, and the next day he woke up in a fog. Food tasted like nothing. He fed and changed the baby, but it felt mechanical. Everything reminded him of Florina. On Tuesday, May 11th, so 2 days after Florina died, Merrill woke up feeling weak and sluggish. He felt like it was something more than the physical effects of his grief, and he was concerned after what had happened to his wife. The doctors still didn't know what killed Florina, and Merrill didn't want to take any chances. However, he had a lot of planning to do for Florina's funeral, and he didn't want to drive all the way to the Crown Point Hospital, so he decided to go to the local health clinic instead. Merrill told the doctor there what had happened to Florina and that he was now feeling sick. The doctor agreed that Merrill was right to be cautious, but he said Merrill's situation was different than his wife's. Florina had asthma, and that likely contributed to her very rapid decline. The doctor told Merrill to rest and sent him home with a prescription-strength pain reliever, an antibiotic, and an antiviral medication. Merrill took these medications over the next few days, but none of them seemed to work. He felt more exhausted each day, and even worse on Friday, May 14th, which was the day of Florina's funeral. Florina's cousin picked Merrill up at the family's trailer that morning, and then they set off for the 70-mile drive south to Sunset Memorial Park in Gallup, New Mexico, where Florina was going to be buried. But they hadn't been in the car long before Merrill started gasping for air. Now, this was before people carried cell phones, so Merrill's cousin had to pull off the highway at a general store to call 911 on a landline. And while he did that, Merrill stumbled out of the car and lurched around in the parking lot, panicking, while his lips and fingernails started turning blue, and then he just collapsed. Paramedics got to the location quickly and raced Merrill to the Gallup Indian Medical Center, and once they arrived, nurses wheeled his stretcher into the emergency room. But by the time he was inside, Merrill had stopped breathing. The physician on duty, Dr. Bruce Tempest, tried to revive him, but it was no use. He declared Merrill dead upon arrival. Later that day, Dr. Tempest sat slumped in a chair, feeling defeated. He had worked at Gallup Indian Medical Center for 23 years and was widely considered an expert at internal medicine. He'd even been awarded the Indian Health Service Clinician of the Year in 1983. But he had felt powerless, being unable to save Merrill's life. As Dr. Tempest signed and dated Merrill's time of death paperwork, An assistant mentioned that the man's fiancée had died too just a week earlier, and like Merrill, she had been in good shape and just declined really quickly. Dr. Tempest felt a wave of fear rise in his chest. Two young, physically fit people didn't just suddenly die of respiratory failure, one right after another. Something had to make them sick. As he thought about Merrill's death, Dr. Tempest realized he'd seen other cases like it. In the past 6 months, he had treated 3 other young Navajos with fatal respiratory issues. He couldn't help wondering if maybe these deaths were all connected. Whatever had killed Florina and Merrill might have killed the others too. The fact that all of the dead were Navajos living within the same general area led the doctor to suspect that this disease might be contagious, and if he had to guess, it seemed like it spread through the air, since the lungs were the most affected organ in every case. If he was right, this could be the start of an incredibly dangerous outbreak. But before he jumped to any conclusions, he needed to gather more information. Dr. Tempest called Crown Point Medical Center, where Florina had been treated before she died. He explained he had treated her boyfriend and wanted to learn what happened to Florina. The doctors at Crown Point didn't hesitate to share a detailed breakdown of her illness. Afterwards, Dr. Tempest hung up and compared both cases. Florina's sounded exactly like what happened to Merrill. It just didn't make sense to Dr. Tempest. He'd never heard of any disease that behaved like this. Also, during this call, the doctor had learned something else that totally puzzled him. Merrill and Florina's 6-month-old son had not gotten sick at all. If this was a contagious airborne disease, the baby would have probably caught it from one of his parents. And why hadn't the grandparents gotten sick either? There was one more thing that was bothering Dr. Tempest. So far, there hadn't been any mild cases of this disease reported. Every single person who got sick died. This disease was unlike anything he had seen before. If it kept spreading, many more people could die. That weekend, Dr. Tempest compiled all the information he could on Florina and Merrill's cases. Then, 3 days after he pronounced Merrill dead, Dr. Tempest phoned the state health department and told them they had a problem. "11 days later, Dr. Jeffrey Dutchin was wrapping up his work at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, where he investigated dangerous outbreaks of disease. He was still in training at the CDC, and the work was demanding. Now he was looking forward to spending the long Memorial Day weekend with his family. But as he was getting ready to leave, there was a knock on his door. It was Dr. Dutchin's boss, and he had a critical job for him. Something troubling was happening on the Navajo reservation. Young, healthy people were dying, and no one knew why. 6 people had already died from this mystery illness, and 4 others had been hospitalized. The CDC was sending out a team early tomorrow morning, and his boss wanted Dr. Dutchin to be a part of it. Dr. Dutchin immediately switched gears and started putting documents in his briefcase. It didn't matter that he had plans with his family. This was urgent. That night, Dr. Dutchin met with the team that was being sent to the Navajo reservation to go over their plan. Once the meeting ended, he was handed a doctor's bag and opened it up to look at the equipment. Along with the regular tools of his trade, he was surprised to find something completely unexpected: a gas mask. Dr. Dutchin knew that it was too early to know what they were up against, but the signs were not good. The next day, Dr. Dutchin and 2 other colleagues from the CDC landed in New Mexico and went straight to an emergency conference of over 30 public health officials. Huge whiteboards lined every wall of the conference room, scribbled with the names of possible germs and toxins, everything from herpes to heavy metals to pesticides and plagues. The mood was frantic. Dr. Dutchin was overwhelmed by all the theories and potential diseases being proposed. Each theory was discussed and dissected. The more possibilities they ruled out, the more worried Dutchin felt. It meant that the cause of death was either something so rare there were very few experts on it, or it was something entirely new. And the longer researchers took to find answers, the more people could die. In fact, on the same day the conference started, a seemingly healthy teenage Navajo girl had collapsed at a school dance at a state park. She died a few hours later. Her death was a stark reminder that the clock was ticking. There was only so much the gathered scientists could accomplish by looking at whiteboards in a conference room. They needed more data. Dr. Dutchin and his colleagues decided to survey some local residents and gather blood samples from anyone who was willing to participate. 2 days after the CDC team arrived, the president of the Navajo Nation, Peterson Za, looked out the window of his office in Window Rock, Arizona. The whole Four Corners area, where Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado meet, and where the Navajo live, had turned into a media circus. News vans were crammed into every available space of the parking lot below. Za's phone was ringing non-stop with calls from journalists, health officials, and locals asking for information on this mystery disease. Za had nothing to tell any of them, but he hoped that would change soon. The Navajo leader was not participating in the CDC's big conference, although he was keeping tabs on their progress. He'd barely slept over the weekend because he was anxiously waiting for any updates. But from what he'd seen so far, he thought the CDC's investigation and the media attention it brought had not been much help. Za's people were terrified, and the outsiders' ignorance of Navajo customs was adding to their panic. Newspapers were printing the names of the deceased right away, even though Navajo tradition forbade their names from being spoken or written for 4 days after they died. This was causing a lot of pain and confusion for the Navajo people. They believed this would prevent the spirit of the dead from properly transitioning to the afterlife. And aggravating the already sensitive situation, some scientists were going right up to people's homes and knocking on the door. They had no idea that Navajo custom required them to wait 30 feet away until they were invited inside. These cultural misunderstandings had led to escalating tension on the reservation, and Za was worried about what might happen next. Just then, the phone rang again. It was a Navajo woman from the reservation claiming that some medical researchers were bothering her family. Za assured her he would be right there to handle the situation. Za hung up, then headed outside. He made his way through the crowd of reporters waiting outside his office. As they shouted questions at him, he promised he'd share any new information with them as soon as he had it. Then he got in his truck and headed to the address the woman on the phone had given him. A few minutes later, Za pulled up to a cluster of low Pueblo buildings that marked the address. The sun was high, barely casting shadows across the dusty ground. Za saw a small crowd shouting at 2 men who were standing off to the side. Both the men looked rattled and confused. Za assumed they were the scientists that the woman had called him about. The situation looked heated, and he sensed it was about to get out of control. Za got out of his truck and recognized the woman who'd called him, and when she saw him, she ran over to him and explained what was going on. The 2 scientists had knocked on her door, asking if her family would be willing to donate blood for testing. Za shook his head in disgust. Now he understood why the crowd was so upset. He wove his way through them and walked up to the 2 scientists. Everyone grew silent as Za introduced himself and explained that the researchers had deeply violated Navajo custom. The scientists' unannounced arrival at the woman's house was considered trespassing by the Navajo people, but even more offensive was their request for a blood sample. The Navajo believe that blood is spiritually attached to the body, and giving a blood sample is seen as a grave violation of privacy. The scientists' ignorance of this cultural belief was an insult to this woman. The scientists' faces turned red, and they apologized profusely. They said they were there on official business researching the outbreak and did not mean to offend anyone. Za cautioned them to be more careful. He wanted to stop this outbreak as much as they did, but if the scientists could not get people to trust them, then they certainly would never learn what caused this disease. The scientists apologized again and packed up to leave. Za calmed the crowd and told the woman to call if any other strange people came around. He had a feeling that there was more trouble to come. Back at his office that same day, Za read the latest news on the outbreak with growing discouragement. The Navajo people weren't just facing problems on the reservation. People in the wider area were beginning to shun them out of fear of the disease. There were several articles about Navajo families being banned from local restaurants and businesses. There was even a report about 27 Navajo third graders from Chinle, Arizona, being denied a field trip to visit pen pals at another school in California. And worse, people were still dying. The death toll was now up to 10, and many more were very sick. Za's eyes locked on one particular article about the outbreak in the Washington Post. A particular phrase in the opening paragraph immediately jumped out at him. It said, quote, "The Navajo flu." He slammed the newspaper down on his desk and rubbed his temples. This had gone far enough. He called in his assistant and told her to schedule a leadership council meeting immediately. The next day, Dr. Ben Muneta, an Indian Health Services doctor in New Mexico, received a call from Za's assistant inviting him to a meeting that night in Window Rock, Arizona, about the outbreak. Dr. Muneta understood why he was being asked to go. His grandfather had been a famous medicine man in the tribe. He had inspired Dr. Muneta to become a Stanford-trained physician with a unique knowledge of both modern science and traditional Navajo medicine. Dr. Muneta had been at the CDC's conference and could be a bridge between their investigation and the Navajo people. He told the assistant he'd be there. As he drove to Window Rock, Dr. Muneta passed a sign nailed to a telephone pole that said, quote, "No media allowed, no newspaper, TV, radio, etc. This means you," end quote. He could tell the locals were clearly fed up with the negative attention. His thoughts turned to his colleague at the CDC, Jeffrey Dutchin. Dr. Dutchin and the other scientists were doing their best to solve this mystery, but they needed help from the Navajo. He hoped that this meeting he was going to have with President Za was the start of that. A few minutes later, Dr. Muneta arrived at Za's office and was led to a small conference room. Dr. Muneta realized this wouldn't be anything like the CDC's giant conference. It was an intentionally small meeting that left out the federal researchers altogether. Za didn't want them interfering in Navajo business. Aside from Za, there were a few senior Navajo medicine men in attendance. The only other physician in the room was the state's Deputy Commissioner of Health. Once everyone was seated, President Za asked Dr. Muneta to update them on how the investigation was going so far. Dr. Muneta admitted that the CDC hadn't found much yet, but they were testing freely given blood samples for all kinds of diseases and working through all the possibilities. Dr. Muneta then turned to the medicine men and asked them for their prayers. The eldest medicine man was grateful for Dr. Muneta's request, but instead of prayers, he offered his own interpretation of the mystery disease outbreak. He believed that too many young Navajo were abandoning traditional practices such as speaking the language and living off the land. They were neglecting ceremonies that were meant to heal the sick, bring good fortune, and celebrate life's milestones. One of the most important of these is called the Blessing Way, which is performed for newborns, brides and grooms, and people who are sick or who have experienced a traumatic event. Without these traditions to keep the world in balance, death was sure to follow. Dr. Muneta could sense the medicine man was holding something back. However, it would be improper for him to press his elder for more information. According to Navajo custom, if Dr. Muneta wanted more knowledge, he had to partake in a ceremony that lasted for several days. As much as Dr. Muneta wanted to adhere to tradition, he knew there was no time to waste. He gathered himself, then sat up straight and looked at the eldest medicine man. In a quiet but very firm voice, Dr. Muneta asked if the medicine man could just tell him more. For a long moment, the medicine man just stared at him. Dr. Muneta felt a knot growing in the pit of his stomach. He knew how upset the Navajos already were that the investigators were violating their customs, and now Dr. Muneta, who knew better, had done it as well. Finally, the medicine man spoke. He acknowledged that Dr. Muneta's behavior was irregular, but considering the gravity of the situation, he agreed to say more, and immediately Dr. Muneta let out a sigh of relief. According to the elder, this was not the first time a deadly illness like this had struck the Navajo. There had been 2 other bouts of mysterious respiratory failure deaths in their community. One was in 1918, and the other was in 1933. It was a long time ago, but stories were still told among the Navajo about those who had died. Dr. Muneta asked if there'd been anything similar about the years in question. The medicine man nodded. Both had been unseasonably wet winters with lots of rain, just like this recent one. Then he described how water changed the land, and these changes in turn brought a creature that carried death. Dr. Muneta knew what the medicine man was referring to. The creature was a real animal that was a prominent figure in Navajo mythology. Navajo called it Na'atsunse and believed it was equally capable of spreading life or death. In Navajo legend, if Na'atsunse entered a home and saw people being wasteful, it would then choose the Navajo's strongest young people to die. Muneta thought about what the medicine man revealed. The doctor didn't think that this animal was literally passing judgment on the Navajo and killing them, and in real life, he'd never heard of it spreading a disease like this through contact with humans. But as he considered the possibility, he came up with a theory that explained how it could happen. And if he was right, it would completely explain this deadly outbreak. Dr. Muneta raced back home and called his CDC colleague, Jeffrey Dutchin, who had led the emergency conference the week before. Dutchin was relieved to hear that the disease was not completely new, but he was confused when Dr. Muneta explained that the outbreak was related to the rain. This land had experienced every type of weather over time. Rain was not unusual, but this disease was. Dr. Muneta told him that it wasn't the rain itself. It was the animal from Navajo legends that came as a result of the rain. And if they were going to solve this mystery, then they would need to find as many of these creatures as possible. Dr. Muneta could sense Dr. Dutchin hesitate, but so far nothing else had worked, and as strange as this theory was about mythical creatures, it was the most promising lead they had. And so Dr. Dutchin told Dr. Muneta he'd get a team together right away. And this time, he'd make sure the investigators respected the Navajo's cultural practices. 3 days later, Dr. Dutchin walked out of his hotel a few miles south of the Navajo reservation. He'd organized this investigation with the help of President Za, and it would be conducted with the help and guidance of medicine men and other Navajo representatives. Dr. Dutchin scanned the parking lot and spotted 4 men gathered around a couple of beat-up trucks. Dr. Dutchin smiled and headed over to them. They were the CDC experts sent to trap the animals that Dr. Muneta had told him about. Another car pulled up next to them, and a stocky Navajo man climbed out. He was an environmental health expert sent by President Za to help with the investigation. He clapped Dr. Dutchin on the back and promised he'd help them find what they were looking for. Dr. Dutchin felt a surge of hope. Thanks to the Navajos, he believed they knew what was making people sick. Now they'd be able to track down that creature that was spreading disease around the area, and hopefully they could figure out how to treat the illness before it killed anyone else. They all piled into a truck and headed for the Navajo reservation. The next day, Dr. Dutchin stood in the middle of the desert. He was dressed in full biohazard gear, a silver suit, airtight helmet, and heavy boots and gloves. He looked across the desert landscape at the other members of his team. They were all dressed in the same protective gear. To outside observers, they might have all looked like astronauts from a movie set. But the work they were doing was very real, and if they weren't careful, it could be very dangerous. Dr. Dutchin was standing above a trap he'd set the day before. Before he checked it, he made sure the wind was blowing away from him to avoid inhaling any harmful particles. If he caught an infected animal, he could be at serious risk for picking up this disease. Once Dr. Dutchin was certain that he was safe, he cautiously bent down and examined the trap. Through the thick material of his helmet, he could hear a faint sound coming from inside, the sounds of a trapped animal. He looked over to his colleagues, who were also examining their traps. Dr. Dutchin hoped that at least one of them had caught what they were looking for. Over the next few days, Dr. Dutchin and his team caught all sorts of animals. They carefully took samples and sent them off to the CDC in Atlanta for analysis. On June 16th, 4 days after the specimens arrived in Atlanta, Dr. Dutchin got his confirmation. The disease afflicting the Navajo wasn't entirely new. It was called a hantavirus. But this strain of hantavirus was entirely unique. The CDC had not been able to identify it earlier because it typically attacks the kidneys, while this particular strain affected people's lungs. But thanks to the tip from the Navajo's medicine men, the CDC scientists knew what was spreading the disease. It was the creature known as the Naats Unse. When Dr. Mineta met with President Za and the medicine men, they told him how this real-life animal played a prominent role in the Navajo's origin myth. According to Navajo legend, the creature is responsible for spreading the seeds of life across the world. However, it can also be dangerous, and its breath can be fatal. This animal is incredibly common in North America, but the Navajo fear it so intensely they burn their clothes if it even touches them. Individually, this animal is not a huge threat, because each one doesn't carry enough of the hantavirus to endanger anyone. But if there's enough of them, they can spread disease like wildfire. In that winter, the heavy rains in the Four Corners area created a concentrated population of the animal that had only occurred twice before, in 1918 and in 1933. In all three instances, the heavy rains had led to more plants and vegetation. This in turn fed the creature and allowed them to multiply. The creature then infiltrated the homes of Navajo people like Florina Woody and Merrill Bay, leaving traces of the hantavirus everywhere they went. The creature that was responsible for spreading this disease was the humble deer mouse. And a hantavirus is a family of viruses spread mainly by rodents. And that spring, deer mice had been all over the Navajo reservation and surrounding area. They crept into homes, they nested in sheds, barns, and storage units. No matter how many holes were plugged or traps were laid, there were just too many of them to stop. And wherever they went, they left their droppings, which carried the deadly virus. When people like Florina and Merrill tried to clean those areas, they came into direct contact with the droppings, and the virus entered their bodies in high enough concentrations to infect them. But now that the CDC knew what was behind the outbreak, local officials could reduce the danger. After the deer mouse was identified as the culprit, public health advisories urged people to avoid rodents and told them how to make it harder for them to enter their homes. And while that didn't eliminate the danger entirely, it reduced it enough to help the outbreak end by the middle of August, almost 3 months after Florina Woody died. All told, 24 people in the Four Corners area were infected with this previously unknown virus. Tragically, half of them died. But thanks to the cooperation between the CDC and the Navajo people, the damage was limited, and there have been very few outbreaks since then. In keeping with the Navajo custom of not speaking the names of the dead, the CDC decided to call this North American hantavirus strain Sin Nombre, which means without a name.